Hello, Rio Conference. This is Karen Studd of WholeMovement, and I am so delighted to be here to participate at some level with this conference. I'm delighted that the conference is happening. I'm coming to you from Israel, where there is, yes, in Israel, where there is currently level 1 of a movement analysis training program happening here in Israel with 20 students, which is a testament to the significance and importance of this material, even in extremely difficult and trying times. So, yay, let's continue the work together and expand the community and make it all happen. I'm talking today about the idea of Laban's map of space, which, as most of you are familiar with, is the 26 directions around place middle, and where Laban uses the Platonic solid models in order to be templates to reference as models of the kinesphere. And I am making the case for the idea that, yes, it's a great map, but it's an incomplete map. So Laban's map is an incomplete map. And I think we really need to address the idea of expanding Laban's map by differentiating space even more, that it has been differentiated, and how this is significant, why we should do it, and what that could mean in terms of movement analysis and the idea of understanding movement across cultures, connected to the space of the inner sphere of the body in relationship to the kinesphere, in relationship to the general space. So the idea of expanding Laban's map. As I'm sure most of us are all aware, duality is a big foundation of the Laban-Bartenieff Movement System, not only the Laban-Bartenieff Movement System, obviously, but it is a real foundation of how we come to understand and make meaning, day, night, black, white. This idea of finding duality, polarities and continuums. And of course, we have the famous movement dualities of mobile, stable, inner, outer, function, expression, exertion, and recuperation. But we also see duality across the entire system. So you see effort factors that have the dualities of indulging, condensing. You see gather, scatter. You see concave, convex. So duality is just a foundation of the meaning making that we do in movement analysis in order to really recognize the patterns of movement and clarify patterns of movement. And in space harmony, duality is also present. As we all know, if you have a dimension, it is one pole, but there's two equal opposite directions. The diameters, two equal oppositional directions, diagonals. And then there is the idea of what we're now really examining, is this idea of inner spheric space and kinespheric space. What's the space within the mover and the space of the personal space of the mover in the kinesphere that Laban's map really articulates. Now, in organizing the kinesphere, as I stated earlier, and as we are aware, anyone who has studied this knows that the Platonic solid models are the way in which we come into relationship with the one-dimensional, two-dimensional, and three-dimensional map of space, giving us the octahedron with the one-dimensional spatial poles and directions, then the planes with the two-dimensional poles that we experience in their golden proportion of unequal poles, creating the infrastructure then of the icosahedron, and then the cube, of course, with the three-dimensionality of the diagonal poles with their equal poles. What is less articulated, for the most part, in many trainings that I have either observed or participated in, is the idea of the kinespheric models themselves as dualities. So the tetrahedron is a dual of itself. The cube and octahedron are duals of one another. And the icosahedron and dodecahedron are duals. And as we understand, duality is a part-whole relationship in where the parts form the whole. And we do parse the parts to understand and differentiate, but in fact, we put them back into the whole. And of course, that's what the notion of a system is, and why I always refer to this as the Laban Bartenieff Movement System, because systems thinking is around this idea of synergistic relationship of part to whole. And the same thing is true in space harmony, whether you're talking about cosmic space harmony or the space harmony of subatomic particles, or you're talking about the space harmony of human movement. There are synergistic relationships which we can define the parts, but then the parts have to come into relationship to the whole. So this brings me to the idea of the dodecahedron. The dodecahedron is not yet part of Laban's map, but it is connected to the duals of space harmony. We are now, in the training programs that I'm involved in, really identifying the duals in studying the octahedron and the cube, for instance. We do that. And so let me share my screen now and bring you into a picture of this. Right. Here we have this idea of the duals represented, and you can see this notion of the octahedron and the cube, right? And so these are the two models that we generally start movement analysis training with, but we generally view them quite in isolation, not completely, but they are not often identified in their dualistic relationship. And so we're really beginning to articulate in the whole movement program of the Laban Bartenieff Movement System training, really seeing the interrelationship between the duals, starting with this exploration of the octahedron and the cube. And we relate this also to mobility and stability, not only of each form itself, but also to the relationship between the forms. So this notion of, for example, in ballet, where you have a very octahedral form, there is the inner spheric form of the cubal spiraling of diagonals in the shadings of a palmol and any of this kind of rotational capacity that is giving the fullness of the nuance of the positions, which are much more kinespherically octahedral in ballet. But the inner spheric structure is really referencing spiralic rotational diagonal connections. So we can start looking at this inner sphere, kinesphere in relationship to spatial dualities. We see this, in other forms as well. But the one that I'm particularly interested in now is this idea of the icosahedron, which we spend a huge amount of time referencing and organizing around, and the dodecahedron, which is less acknowledged. Now, this is not to say that the dodecahedron has not been explored. It has, and in Laban's writings, he talks about the dodec-sum, and there have been many movement analysts, among them Pam Schick, who is the person that I first encountered dodecahedral space through. Many movement analysts have been involved in looking at dodecahedral space, but we don't yet include a clarity of looking at dodecahedral relationship to icosahedron, which is very articulated in the system, nor do we have spatial symbols for the dodecahedral directions, with the exception of the diagonal directions, which are part of the dodecahedron. So a lot more work, from my perspective, needs to be done. All right, so why? Why should we consider this? Why is it necessary? We have all this fullness that we already have, and Laban, is noted for being quoted as saying or thinking that the icosahedron most closely approximates the human kinesphere. And I have a lot of thoughts around this, whether that really is the case or whether it really is the dual of the icos and the dodec together that create the most close approximation to the human kinesphere. So that's another reason I'm very interested in this. And on top of that, because I see dodecahedral space. I started seeing dodecahedral space looking at some of my close friends who were very strong yoga practitioners, and in watching them, taking classes with them, I really started thinking, well, a lot of this space that they're doing is not really fully represented well at all in the models of space that we're using. And then I came across a student, um, Lawrence, in one of the training programs, who was clearly very brilliant young man and very spatially aware. He could draw any of the geometric forms easily without any problem. But when it came to movement and trying to do icosahedral scales, Lawrence always was reversing the primary and secondary poles of any of the planal icosahedral models that we were using. And I kept thinking, what's going on with Lawrence here? What's, yeah. And in retrospect, I think that Lawrence was really being pulled into dodecahedral space. I also started seeing, the more I looked into cultural perspectives on dance and culture, seeing dodecahedral space expressed in dance forms. So in addition to yoga, seeing it in classical Indian dance forms, seeing it in some of the traditional folkloric Chinese forms that many of my students in China are teachers of. So I really started seeing the necessity for trying to see space other than the 26 directions that we currently use in exploring Laban's map. So that was a lot of my thinking, but it didn't stop there. It also really went deeply into body level experience. So the more deeply I got involved in really things around the foundational actions of being human, walking, for instance, where yes, we are moving forward. We are actually, of course, because we are bipedal locomotion, and there is this rotational aspect of the pelvis. We're not doing a pure sagittal shift in walking, of course. And of course, there's only a little bit of laterality there because we're right and left, and we are trying to focus on the efficiency of going forward. But in fact, the space we're doing is not going into a sagittal dimensional space, and it's certainly not going into sagittal planal space, which has no right-leftness. And I started thinking, oh, okay, well, what is this? Oh, well, this is really taking the idea of the horizontal plane and making the horizontal plane have its side-sidedness, the small idea, and its front-backness, the larger idea. So the dodecahedral space again became this idea of, oh, that's what walking is really founded in. Walking is really founded in dodecahedral space rather than this idea of icosahedral space. And then in lying on my back and doing endless amounts of heel rocks, coming into the concave convex curvature of the spine and that lovely wave-like vertical throughness of that sequencing from lower to upper or upper to lower, noticing that this too, okay, so this is mostly up and down in my length because I, as a human, am mostly long, but there's also the depth, right? So, okay, so those two things combine in icosahedral space in the sagittal, but this is in the reverse, right? So this is mostly in my length with a little bit of depth of this rocking action. So yet again, dodecahedral space coming front and center into the experience of heel rocks. And so this continued on and on, this notion of, oh, the relationship of inner spheric space, what's happening inside my body, and what's happening in the kinesphere around me. And then this additional map of space, the directions that I was perceiving that were not clearly icosahedral, dimensional, or diagonal, really has pushed the envelope for me to where I really believe that we need to address the incompleteness of Laban's map. And I think this links well to the idea of inclusivity. I think that as we expand Laban's map and see more and more relationships at the profound level of body, at the profound level of cultural expression, we will expand the idea of how space harmony and the movement analysis through space harmony is such a rich and inviting place, but it can be available to all only if the map shows the territory that all occupy. So we want to expand the map that Laban was engaged in creating. And I want to share with you a few pictures here. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Well, let's see what else I can do. Okay, so here you have an image of, I hope this image is coming through, of the dodecahedron with the icosahedral diameters of the planes. I'm going to change just for a moment and see if I can find that for you again. There you go. So here we have the dodecahedron. The diagonals are the ones in yellow. The blue peripheral pathways are the form, the container, if you will, of the model, the kinespheric model of the dodecahedron. And you'll see here we orient ourselves on this place if you were to stand, rather than when we're in the ICOS, we're standing on side lows. Right here, we're standing in front and back lows. Right? And so that is our sagittal plane of the dodec that we would be stabilizing ourselves for orienting in this kinespheric model. Then these red are the icosahedral diameters, and the yellow, of course, are the diagonals, which we're familiar with in the cube, but also are part of the 20 directions of the dodec. And I'm also going to show you some other lovely images. Here is another image of the dodec, just showing you the dodec and the diagonals. So you can see how the diagonals are part of the dodecahedron. And I'd love to show you another image. This is dodecahedron in nature. This is actually a dodecahedral mushroom. So the idea that dodecahedrons also exist organically in the world is out there. So dodecahedrons and space harmony of dodecahedrons are, available to all. And again, another way in which I believe that this is an important idea in including Laban's map. And I have one more image if I can find it. Not sure where I put it. Let's see. That's not it. Oh, there we go. I wanted to share this quote. Okay, so Laban, although he did not map the dodecahedron, was already, and anyone who's looked at his, images of his drawings has seen many images of the dodec. But Laban also is noted for having said, music originates from rhythmical movement of the body, and musical harmony is surely a child of ancient trace form knowledge, in other words, body knowledge, as it is possible to recognize musical harmony in the structure of the dodecagon. Dodecagons can be found in many books on theory of music. Virtually, they are surface lines connecting in one continuous circuit, the dimensional cross spread into one plane. And then he goes on to say, it is the task of future choreitic research to investigate these amazing relationships. So that's Laban's challenge to us now in the future, is to investigate the dodecahedron. That's what I take away from this. Not only is the body the basis, again, of our knowledge of these forms, but also it is our legacy, and it is up to us to continue his genius of exploration. So there you have it in a nutshell. Now, this is a hard thing to just add to any movement analysis training program. Okay, you suddenly have a new form, no symbols, and lots more spatial directions. Finding the dual relationship between forms gives an inroad, and it starts to make it more possible when seeing them as two parts of a whole as opposed to isolated entities. Finding the body basis also is a path to connecting to our experience of this form. But then it doesn't solve yet the idea of, okay, so how do we represent this in motif symbols? How do we talk about this? Because if you say the vertical plane in the ICOS, of course, we're naming the vertical plane for its primary spatial pole. If you then say the dodec vertical plane, are you talking about the plane that has vertical as the primary pole, which would be the dodec sagittal plane in our way of thinking? Or do you just say dodec vertical plane, but have the poles reversed? So a lot of discussion needs to go around how we implement a practice of expanding this map in order to make it accessible, available, understandable to the practitioners of movement analysis and the explorers of space harmony. So this is hopefully just a beginning for that, for all of us. And I do want to engage with all those who are out there. One last thing about this that I have also been very interested in, and so I am now introducing dodecahedron in the 4th module of training programs as kind of an advanced space harmony, but giving people experiences in it and talking about its relationship to the icosahedron, which they've just come through a lot of training in, and giving them some practice in it. But before that, I also now am including the tetrahedral duals of the cube. So the tetrahedron, like all the spatial duals, all the Platonic forms have a dual, and the tetrahedron is a dual of itself. And if you find the duals of the tetrahedron, they form the cube. And I've been creating a lot of tetrahedral scales around that idea. And there's a lot of the duality of oppositional ends of the diagonals in forming these tetrahedral duals, and the relationship between mobility and stability, between inner and outer, between function and expression, is very much at the heart of all this exploration. And so I do really hope that people will take some time to consider this possibility, to be creative and curious in their explorations, and find room for this idea as we move forward in opening Laban's map as a large idea, which is possible to bring more people into the Laban Bartenieff Movement System community. So that's all I have to share today. I look forward to engaging with any or all of you who want to connect with me. You can definitely try to connect with me and ask me more questions about this, or share what you're doing around this topic. I would love to hear from you. Thanks again for this opportunity. I hope the Rio conference is a wonderful success and great for all. Until we manage to connect. Bye-bye.